At first glance, Friedrich Nietzsche is not a figure we immediately associate with tactics or cunning. He is often painted as the mad philosopher, the herald of existential despair, or the destroyer of illusions. But to stop there would be a profound mistake. Beneath his radical style lies an extraordinary depth of strategic thinking, a kind of philosophical intelligence that can outmaneuver almost any opponent, not through deceit, but through a relentless commitment to deeper truths. The tactic Nietzsche offers is in essence the weaponization of honesty. Not mere truth-telling in the shallow sense, but a ruthless kind of intellectual and existential integrity that forces both oneself and one's adversaries to confront realities they would rather avoid. Nietzsche understood that most people operate not on truth, but on a delicate scaffolding of illusions, half-truths, and socially accepted lies. To outsmart them, one does not necessarily need to lie better. One needs only to expose the groundlessness of their assumptions, to strip away their comforting veils, and to reveal the void beneath. This is not an easy path. To use Nietzsche's tactic, one must first endure the pain of disillusionment personally. One must be willing to question one's own deepest beliefs, to live through the death of God, the collapse of moral absolutes, the recognition that truths are often little more than convenient fictions. Nietzsche once wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how, but to find that why after dismantling the illusions that sustain most people, that is the test of real strength. Only the one who has survived this inner collapse is fit to wield the tactic he describes." The heart of this tactic is what Nietzsche called the perspectival nature of truth. He argued that there are no absolute facts, only interpretations. What most people take as immutable truths are, in reality, vantage points, selective readings of a chaotic, indifferent reality. To recognize this is to liberate oneself from the tyranny of fixed ideas. It allows a kind of flexibility, an ability to move between interpretations, to challenge a premise at its root rather than getting entangled in its surface structure. Imagine a debate. Your opponent insists on a certain moral claim, for example, that justice requires equality. Rather than arguing within the framework, quibbling about what counts as equality or how to measure it, the Nietzschean tactician steps back and questions the framework itself. Why should we value equality at all? Is equality natural, or is it a resentment-driven fiction? Suddenly, the ground shifts. The opponent finds themselves defending assumptions they did not even realize they were making. The debate moves from superficial skirmishes to an existential confrontation. Very few are prepared for such a battlefield, but this tactic is not only about debates or arguments, it is a way of life. In the marketplace of ideas, in negotiations, in creative projects, even in private relationships, those who think in frameworks rather than within them possess an enormous strategic advantage. They can anticipate objections, preempt challenges, and innovate beyond the stale categories others cling to. However, Nietzsche also issues a warning. The danger of this radical honesty is isolation. To live without illusions is to live without many of the social comforts that sustain ordinary existence. One risks being misunderstood, ostracized, even vilified. Nietzsche himself paid the price, descending into madness at the end of his life, abandoned by many who once praised him. To outsmart others by this method is not merely to triumph intellectually, it is to embrace a profound solitude. To use Nietzsche's tactic effectively, then, requires not only intellectual acumen, but also psychological resilience. One must be capable of carrying the burden of seeing what others refuse to see. One must be willing to be hated for it, to be accused of cynicism or cruelty, even when one's motivation is ultimately a higher fidelity to truth. Another essential aspect of Nietzsche's strategic approach is what he termed the re-evaluation of all values. Most societies operate on inherited moral codes, notions of good and evil passed down like genetic material. But Nietzsche urges us to question these codes ruthlessly. Where did they come from? Whose interests do they serve? Are they life-affirming, or do they spring from a hatred of life, a denial of vitality and strength? By applying this tactic, you can unmask ideologies, institutions, and individuals alike. You can reveal how systems that claim to serve justice often entrench power, how values that present themselves as altruistic sometimes conceal deep-seated resentments. You force your interlocutor to defend not only their arguments but their very reason for believing anything at all. In doing so, you expose the existential stakes hidden beneath intellectual postures. Nietzsche believed that very few are capable of such honesty. Most people, he claimed, are too weak, too attached to their comforting illusions. This creates a profound asymmetry. If you are willing to bear the cost of seeing seeing clearly, you gain an advantage over those who cannot. You move freely where others are paralyzed by inherited dogmas. You act decisively while others hesitate, trapped in invisible prisons of belief. Yet Nietzsche also knew that this freedom comes at a price. Without illusions, without external guarantees of meaning, one faces the terrifying necessity of creating value oneself. He called this figure the Übermensch, the one who creates new values in the face of nothingness. Outsmarting others, then, is not the ultimate goal. It is merely the first step. The real project is self-overcoming, the forging of a new way of being that transcends the ruins of the old. In this sense, Nietzsche's tactic is not about winning debates or accumulating power in the ordinary sense. It is about living authentically in a world stripped of illusions. Outsmarting others is merely a side effect of a deeper mastery, the mastery of oneself. Consider how this tactic might apply to everyday situations. In professional settings, those who can think outside inherited categories often revolutionize industries. Entrepreneurs who question not how to make a better horse-drawn carriage, but why we need horses at all, invent automobiles. Scientists who challenge foundational assumptions about matter discover quantum mechanics. Artists who refuse the limits of their genres create entirely new forms of expression. In personal life, the ability to spot and question unexamined assumptions can prevent manipulation, foster genuine relationships, and guide one towards self-chosen goals rather than living by the expectations of others. It turns every interaction into an opportunity for deeper understanding, every challenge into a moment of self-definition. But there is a danger here too. Nietzsche warned against the temptation of becoming merely a destroyer, one who can tear down but cannot build. To live the full spirit of Nietzsche's teaching, one must not only outsmart but also create. One must offer new values, new meanings, new forms of life. It is not enough to see the void. One must dance upon it. This dance requires what Nietzsche called the will to power, not the crude domination of others, but the inner force to shape oneself, to impose form upon chaos, to say yes to life even in its darkest moments. Outsmarting others becomes a natural outgrowth of this deeper process of becoming. In practical terms, this means cultivating certain habits of mind. First, radical skepticism, a willingness to question even one's most cherished beliefs. Second, perspectival thinking, the ability to see multiple viewpoints without becoming trapped in any one of them. Third, creative courage, the readiness to invent new interpretations, new values, new ways of living when old ones crumble. Nietzsche knew that most would fail in this endeavor. The temptation to retreat into comforting lies is overwhelming. But for those rare few who persist, who dare to confront the abyss and carve meaning from it, the rewards are immeasurable. They gain not only strategic superiority over others, but a deeper, richer, more exhilarating experience of existence itself. This, ultimately, is the essence of Nietzsche's hidden tactic. Outthink not by trickery, but by truth. Outsmart not by deceit, but by daring to see what others cannot. Win not by force, but by forging a life so luminous, so authentic, that it reshapes the very ground on which battles are fought. The mastery of Nietzsche's tactic also involves embracing a new relationship with language itself. Words for most people serve as anchors of stability, names for seemingly fixed realities. Yet Nietzsche knew that language is itself an invention, a set of metaphors hardened over time into apparent truths. Those who wish to outsmart others must first liberate themselves from the tyranny of language. They must see words not as ultimate realities, but as tools, flexible and contingent, capable of creating or dismantling worlds. This means recognizing when a debate or conflict is trapped by words, when two sides argue endlessly, not because they disagree about reality, but because they cling to different linguistic frameworks. To outmaneuver such situations, one must step outside the trap, redefining the terms or exposing their emptiness. Nietzsche demonstrated this again and again. Consider his dismantling of the concept of good and evil. Rather than accepting traditional moral binaries, he asked, what are the historical origins of these terms? Who benefits from their perpetuation? In doing so, he revealed that much of what was considered good was born out of weakness, out of the resentment of the powerless against the strong. This genealogical method, tracing concepts back to their roots, becomes an unparalleled intellectual weapon. The ordinary mind accepts categories as given. The Nietzschean mind questions the genealogy of every category. It asks, who created this concept? Under what conditions? For what purpose? When you ask these questions consistently, you see the hidden architecture of human thought. You uncover its power structures, its fears, its hidden desires. And with that vision, you can either dismantle or reshape shape the worldviews of those around you. But there is another subtler level to Nietzsche's tactic. Outsmarting others is not only about intellectual superiority, it is about emotional discipline. Most people defend their beliefs not because they have reasoned them out, but because they are emotionally attached to them. Attack their beliefs, and you trigger their insecurities, their tribal loyalties, their fear of chaos. To succeed in this arena, the Nietzschean strategist must combine ruthless clarity with a deep understanding of human emotion. This means knowing when to press an advantage and when to withdraw, knowing when exposing a lie will shatter a person in ways that make communication impossible, knowing when to lead someone gently toward new truths rather than forcing them into defensive denial. Outsmarting others in Nietzsche's spirit is not about humiliation, it is about awakening. It requires a form of compassion, not the weak pity Nietzsche despised, but a fierce compassion that demands more from others than they demand from themselves. Such a way of being demands immense personal power. Nietzsche's will to power is often misunderstood as mere domination over others, but in reality it refers first and foremost to self-mastery. To govern one's own impulses, one's own fears, one's own tendency to cling to comforting illusions. Only then can one hope to lead others or oneself toward a higher existence. At the heart of Nietzsche's vision is the idea that life itself is struggle, not merely survival, but a continual overcoming of limits, a reaching beyond the given toward new forms, new values, new horizons. To outsmart others, then, is not an end in itself. It is part of the larger, endless dance of creation and destruction that defines existence. Every time you dismantle a falsehood, you clear ground for something new to grow. Every time you expose an illusion, you invite the birth of a deeper truth. But what, then, is the ultimate goal? What lies beyond the endless deconstruction of others' beliefs? Nietzsche gives us the answer: the creation of the self as a work of art. The true Nietzschean tactician is not merely a critic, not merely a strategist. They are a creator. They forge themselves, thought by thought, choice by choice, into a unique, irreplaceable form. Outsmarting others becomes a training ground for this higher task, the shaping of life into something beautiful, powerful, and free. It is here that Nietzsche introduces the concept of amor fati, the love of fate, to embrace all of existence, even its suffering and chaos, as necessary and good, to not merely accept life, but to affirm it, to will it. The ultimate proof of strength is not in defeating opponents, but in saying yes to existence itself, without reservation. Those who truly master Nietzsche's tactic do not merely win arguments or manipulate outcomes. They live at a higher register. Their very existence becomes a rebuke to mediocrity, a beacon of possibility. They show that it is possible to live without illusions, to create without guarantees, to love without possession, to think without dogma. This demands courage of a rare kind. Nietzsche called it the courage to be alone, to stand without external validation, without applause, without the comforting echo of shared beliefs. To find in oneself the source of meaning, the source of values, the source of joy. Outsmarting others when seen in this light becomes almost incidental. It is not the goal, but the byproduct of a more profound strength. It happens naturally because most people, trapped by convention and fear, cannot match the fluidity, the audacity, the creative force of one who has embraced the abyss and danced upon it. To live this way is to become dangerous, not in the sense of causing harm, but in the sense of becoming untouchable by the smallness of the world. It is to become a source of disruption, a catalyst for transformation, a living testament to the possibility of a freer, fiercer, more luminous way of being. In the end, Nietzsche's tactic is less a method and more a metamorphosis. It demands not cleverness alone, but the remaking of the soul. It demands that we become the very forces we wish to unleash upon the world. Forces of questioning, forces of creation, forces of affirmation. To see through illusions is only the beginning. To tear them down is the next step. But to create new realities, to live as if existence were a canvas and oneself the artist, that is the final act. That is where Nietzsche's true legacy lies. And so the challenge stands before us. Will we dare to wield this tactic fully? Will we dare not only to outsmart, but to outcreate? Not only to outmaneuver, but to outlive the timid spirits of our age? Every choice pulls us closer or farther from that destiny. Every act of courage, every act of creation, every act of affirmation brings us nearer. Nietzsche offers no guarantees, no certainties, no easy victories. Only the promise of a life more real, more intense, more our own. And perhaps in the end, that is the greatest triumph one can achieve. To outsmart the world not by fleeing it, not by despising it, but by affirming it so powerfully that even its chaos becomes beautiful.